Good afternoon, everyone. So nice to have you in this virtual space. My name is Aaron. I am the literary director and dramaturg at New York Theater Workshop, and we are so grateful that you are joining us for our Mondays at 3 masterclass with writer, director, performer Whitney White. Hi, Whitney. We are broadcasting this via Zoom and are simultaneously live streaming on Facebook Live, and so we're happy to have you all here. This fireside chat and or this masterclass rather, and all of our work that we're offering virtually is free and available to the entire New York Theater Workshop community, near and far. If you're in a position to support the work, any donation that you could make makes a huge difference. And you'll find a link to donate in the chat if you're joining us live on Zoom, and in the comments if you're tuning in live on Facebook. The class today, Whitney will talk and teach for about 45 minutes, we think, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. If you have a logistical question, you can type that into the Q&A box on Zoom or into the comments on Facebook, and we will take care of both of those. And then when we get to the Q&A portion, you can also use the Q&A box, or maybe we'll take some live questions. But if you see a question that you agree with, you can upvote it or you can like it on Facebook, and so we can see what questions are most burning in people's minds. And here is Whitney White. Whitney is a director, a writer, and a musician originally from Chicago, now in Chicago, but based in New York. She is a believer of alternative forms of performance, multidisciplinary work, and collaborative processes. Whitney is currently part of the Rolex Mentorship and Protege Arts Initiative, is the current awardee of the Susan Stroman Directing Award. She is a former New York Theater Workshop 2050 Directing Fellow. Currently developing as a writer and composer, Definition, and a 5-part series on Shakespeare's women and Black female ambition. And recent directing credits include Our Dear Dead Drug Lord, Alicia Harris's What to Send Up When It Goes Down, The Amen Corner, and an Iliad, which is one of the topics of the conversation today. Thank you so much for being with us, Whitney. We look forward. There's 177 people here on Zoom. There's more on Facebook.
What's up, people? What's up,
community
everybody?
is here. I'll see you soon.
Okay, bye. First of all, what's up, everybody tuning into this? It's really nice to share a little time and space with y'all, even though we have to do it over a computer, which is so weird. But, you know, Aaron and Rachel, the very, very dope humans that work at New York Theater Workshop, reached out to me to kind of talk about my process and how I interpret text. And it was a really exciting opportunity because there was a very kind of seminal production at New York Theater Workshop in 2012 called An Iliad by Lisa Peterson and Dennis O'Hare. And I recently directed a version of it at the Long Wharf Theater this past spring of 2019. So I figured there's probably not a better text for me to talk about in terms of like going into my process, as weird as it may seem, because there was that little overlap. And I hope a lot of you got to see that seminal production in 2012. It was really, really, really beautiful. But if not, then we'll talk about it a little bit with specific regards to how I think about putting the text in space on bodies and with designers. And we'll look at some images from both productions, and we'll even listen to some music, because music is a huge function of it. And I promise it won't be that awkward, but I look forward to your questions at the end. So please, please, please think about it. Save them, ask me anything. I love talking to folks. I think the first thing I'll talk about is just like method. God, I'm about to sound so theatery, y'all. Are you ready? But I think in terms of interpreting the text or putting the text on stage, I have sort of developed a checklist or a kind of rundown. I like to call it a rundown. I have a little bit of a rundown when I'm thinking about directing. And the first bit of that is always the text, you know, unless you're working on a devised piece of theater, whether you're working on a new play or a musical or a classic, you're gonna get a document with words on it. And it's like, I always think my first goal is to just get to know that document as intimately as possible. Because when you're directing, you're supposed to be the authority on all things, right? The way it looks, the way it sounds, the way it smells, the way you design it, the way the money moves in the budget and all these things. But the reality is very often you're getting a text that you'll have let's say you get a text and an artistic director wants to hear your pitch in like 3 weeks. You have to come up with a point of view that is solid enough that from which you can speak, when really it's a document that the writers may have spent years with, right? So when I first got the text for an Iliad, it was sent to me from Long Wharf. Big shout out to those homies, I love them. But you know, this is a text that Lisa and Dennis, Lisa being one of the writers and also director of the original production, had sat with for years and years and years. And so how do you kind of enter in on a collaboration that's already been going that deep? And the first thing you can do is get to know the text itself. So it's like you have to kind of develop your own reading process. Me, I don't know, I was never officially diagnosed with ADD, but I get so excited when I'm reading that sometimes on a first read, you'll see what you want to see versus seeing what's actually there. So that first read can like sometimes generate a lot of adrenaline because you're immediately like making connections. So I recommend, you know, the kind of first step I do upon a first read is just like read it feverishly through. And then I just like get a document going and I write down every single thing that's memorable without referring back to it. I kind of do a kind of like what I call like a popcorn sheet. Oh my God, these terms, the theater truth is coming out, but it's like it's a bunch of thoughts that you popcorn out of your first read. Those thoughts could be anything. It could be things the play reminds you about your own life, songs that you hear, colors that you see, fragments of text that are really memorable to you, your favorite parts of the play, your least favorite parts of the play. I think that that can be equally informative, but I kind of just like write all that down with no punctuation on one document. Then I'll go in and do a second read where it's really like me trying to learn what I call like director logistics. How many people do I need to make this play happen? What kind of designers might I want to talk to? What are the literal things in the world that the playwright is calling for? This is the kind of more literal stuff that's not quite as sexy as all the tangential things, right? Like what props are in there? Where is it taking place? Like really basic things. Like on the second read, I think I really try and like let myself be a child in some ways. And I think before I talk anymore, I kind of want to show you their text, and I want to show you what some of the first things you see when you read an Iliad, if you're going to interpret it, some of the first things the writers tell you right away. And it's an example of things that I like to take away in my second read. So it's like my first read is kind of where I dream, right? It's like where I feel like I'm a co-author of the text. It's like written by Lisa, Dennis, and Whitney White for this production. You know what I mean? And then the second read is where I treat it more like a Bible, where I read every single word, every single stage direction, and kind of try and see what's there. So I'm going to share my screen with y'all, and we're going to look at this together. All right. So when you see this play, let's see, there we go. So when you see this play, it says an Iliad by Lisa Peterson and Dennis O'Hara, shout out, they're the bomb, based on Homer's The Iliad, translated by Robert Fagel. So on my second read, already the first page is like telling me so much information, right? Because there's a lot of people in the pot already. There's Lisa, there's Dennis, there's Homer, who wrote the original Iliad in the 8th century, right? We'll get into that soon. And then there's homeboy Robert Fagels, who's also doing a translation. So I know that as I'm looking for a way to kind of put this text into the world, I'm gonna have to learn as much as I can about everybody on this first page so that I can form an opinion and a point of view so that that can later become a 3D world with design and actors. Then it's interesting, you know, everybody's process is different. I've talked to directors who are like, I don't read author's notes, or I don't read stage directions, because very often a stage direction is from a first production and might not be applicable to your concept, but I tend to read it all, because once you know the rules, then you can break them with authority. But if you don't take the time to really see what the writer's original impulse was, I find that I've missed things, you know? And again, I met this play, I had a month to pitch it. These people who wrote it, these incredible artists, had years to write it, tour it, you know, practice it and codify it. So why wouldn't I just take that little bit of time to get to know them? So I really love this little note that they have. I've highlighted it. I will read it. So in the author's note, they say, "We began talking about performing the Iliad not long after the United States invaded Iraq in 2003. We were both thinking about war and plays about war, thinking that at the time, the best thing a theater artist could do was to find a way to talk about what it means to be a country at war." So for me, you know, after my first read, where I got to dream, where I wrote down all the things I loved, all the things I connected to, reading that again is quite centering, right? Because out of all the ideas I had for the piece, they have a very specific idea, and that is, what does it mean to be a country at war? So I knew that however I was going to bring this play to life, it had to kind of be an intersection between my ideas and this kind of a priori original impulse that these creators had. One more little section, also in the author's note. The writers say, "We imagine that our poet is Greek, as Homer was, and traveled across the wine-dark seas with Agamemnon and Achilles and the Greek armies. That he has roamed the world telling the story of Achilles and Hector and Hecuba and Hermes and all the hundreds of other characters that inhabit the Iliad. He has told this story for thousands of years, and at that time, he has witnessed or thinks or imagines he has witnessed every war from the Trojan War onwards. He's found himself at each battle, in every trench, at every wall, in the mess halls, in the infirmaries, over the centuries." One last little bit before we get back to it. Characters, it says, the poet. One character listed there. And then we get into this text. So the first thing about the text that hits me once I get through my kind of fever dream read is that the text manifests in three ways. There's a kind of ancient Greek, which is pretty wild, y'all. I definitely had to get a Greek consultant. Shout out to Emily Greenwood from Yale. She's the bomb. And this Greek is translated below. So that's one aspect that manifests pretty regularly in the text. Then you have contemporary language that Dennis and Lisa themselves have kind of brought to you, right? And then there's another function, which is translation from the actual Iliad, Homer's Iliad, right? I'm gonna stop the screen share. Great. So, you know, that was so much information and we just got through 3 pages. It's like we learned about everyone involved, from Homer to the translator to the writers. We learned about the author's intent, which was making a piece that's a meditation on war and what it means to be a part of war. And then we learned that there's 3 different types of text. So all that stuff has to be kind of interpreted, right? Before I can get to my stuff I want to do, which is like really dope sound, music, lighting, and then inject people of color into the story, right? Before I can do that, I have to like get a grasp on all those things. And the best way to do that is just by educating yourself with the text. It sounds so cheesy, but it's like you got to read it. And you have to think of each, it's almost like this is so weird, but like an Instagram filter or something. Like every time you read the text, or I read it, I get a different filter. So the first time I read it, I get the filter of what I want it to be. And then the second time, I can really learn about their intentions. And then the third time, it's the third read that I start to really groove and think about what it could look like. And for this play, just going back to, one second, I was trying to screen share. Ooh, technology, y'all. Just going back to this opening that we kind of read together. One second, I'll pull it up again. Going back to this opening, you know, by the time I read it a third time, I started to understand who the poet might be. And the thing you should know about this play in Iliad is it's essentially a one-man or one-woman show in my case, but really it's performed by 2 performers that are kind of in dialogue in this way. And the key aspect of it is the poet, right? The poet is Greek. It's someone who's roamed the world telling it, someone who's seen every single war. And when I started interpreting the text, I knew that I wanted to have a point of view on who the poet was. Maybe New York Theater Workshop folks, can we show some images from the New York Theater Workshop production while I talk about this? I'm going to show you some pictures. So in the original production, the very brilliant and incredible Dennis O'Hare played the poet. You know, he's like one of our dopest performers. He's so incredible and shape-shifting and powerful and has such a great command of text. But I knew that my poet, when I think of someone who's traveled the world and been a part of every war and been a survivor of every war, and someone who's constantly kind of left to pick up the rubble, you know, I immediately think of Black women, myself being one, you know, and I became immediately interested in shifting who this poet was for our production. Oh, a sidebar, they're showing this awesome bassist. Another thing that's really important to the play is music, of course. And in their production, they had this incredible, we're gonna play some audio files soon, but upright bass player, and it was just a very beautiful soundscape, so I knew that I was also gonna be able to have a jump off from there. But can I show this picture of Rachel? It's the one with her reaching her hand out. So this was my poet, Rachel Christopher. She's an amazing actress. You could just leave it on there for a moment. Thank you. So I knew that in interpreting this text, I needed to find what my version of the poet is. And, you know, I find that people who pick up the pieces, people who are always surviving, people who've been there from the beginning of time, that is the Black female and the Black feminine for me. It's very eternal. And so once I landed on that, that was kind of when the play started to open up for me. And Rachel was just so incredible. And it's not like we had to adapt or change any of the language. It actually just served so well in a different body, which is a testament to the writers and to their kind of intelligence in engineering this this piece. All right, you can come back to my screen. Thank you. It feels so fancy, y'all. I'm like, can you show the image, please? Theater, No, seriously though, it was really exciting to kind of get to work on the text with Rachel, because then I was hearing the whole thing a new way. And that kind of bled through every aspect of production. Like the simple questions I like to ask, you know, is where are we? Who are we? Who's this for? And why are we doing it? And as soon as I had a Black woman at the center of that, all those questions kind of came together. I think another thing that is important to me that I should talk about is kind of time and place. This who are we, where are we, why are we doing this, who are we doing it for? And, you know, in many ways, if you were to try and do a literal restaging of what Lisa and Dennis did, it would be a period piece, right? Because they started thinking about it in 2003, it was done in 2012. But when I was charged to do the piece, it was 2019. We're still actively engaged in many, many wars, but things had shifted. So, you know, the kind of method that was used in bringing Dennis out and the way that they set it up, I knew I needed to do something different. So for our production, we shifted a little bit. I think I'll go back and just talk about that method really fast. Okay, so locating Rachel in it. So, and analyzing the text, right? We have different filters we take. The first one is the dream filter, I call it. The second one is the Bible filter, getting to know it. The third one is starting to come up with design and world building, really. And world building is really simple. It's just the who, what, where, when, why, and how. And so my who was a Black woman. I wanted her at the center of it. And my what is essentially the same. The what is the event of the play. And the event of Lisa and Dennis's play is this poet coming out and speaking to the audience direct, and taking the audience through the epic poem that is the Iliad, right? So then I kind of have to back up and be like, well, what is an Iliad? And I think a lot of us know kind of what that is. It's an exciting piece to do for an American audience because like mainstream media has shown us so many different ways of looking at ancient Greek history. You know, you might think of the Brad Pitt movie, you might think of the Hercules musical, maybe you saw it in the park, but usually, you know, your average American audience member has some kind of basic understanding of what like the Iliad and the Trojan horse and Helen of Troy is. We have many touchstones. So it's kind of exciting because it's a familiar piece in some ways, which means sometimes you can take it a little further outside of its comfort zone, which I think we did. So yeah, an Iliad is an epic poem by Homer. Homeboy, you know, was recounting the last 2 weeks of the Trojan War, specifically the Greek siege of the city of Troy. So it's this story that, you know, shows all these heroes and Achilles and all this wrath and violence, and also it talks about the gods and the ancient Greek mythology. It's like this very dense kind of classic piece of text that Lisa and Dennis put into this really tight, beautiful contemporary piece of theater. So I was like, okay, how am I going to get into this? I know I want a Black woman to be a poet, but where are we? And who's she speaking to? And a lot of that didn't change. I think I kind of said that. It was like, I wanted her to come out and feel she could just talk to the audience. And so I was like, well, where would a Black woman maybe just come out, get stuck somewhere and have to talk to people? And I was like thinking about airports. I also have like a big fear of flying, and I have to travel a lot these days, or I used to before all of this, before we were all kind of grounded. But like, I was like, the airport felt like a good space for me, but it couldn't just stay an airport because we need to be transported to different places. So my set designer, Dan Sewell, he's a brilliant artist, was like, well, how can we change it? How can we be affected by ancient Greece itself? So as we show you images, you'll kind of see a space that looks like a rock concert meets an airport meets like a cave, you know, in the city of Troy. And we kind of landed on these three areas because we analyzed the text and we're looking for like major touchstones, like major locations. And I was like, I need a space a Black woman can come out and talk to a bunch of people. I need to be transported to Homer's time. And I want to feel like my senses are engaged, which is kind of how we landed on the Greek cave, the kind of organic structure of the cave, which you'll see soon. I think it'd be good to talk a little bit more about Lisa and Dennis's play, because I think, again, like when I'm interpreting the text, the best thing you can do is just get to know the play. So I mentioned it a bit before, but it's really, really kind of this dense text that comes at you in three ways, with ancient Greek, contemporary language, and then also translations from Homer's Iliad. It has a 7-part structure. Structure is always really exciting to me, because if you can kind of decipher a structure, then you can usually use that structure to punctuate it with sound or costume changes or movement, which I like most of the time. And so this 7-book structure that Lisa and Dennis take you through is really exciting because it's super clean, you know? It's like each chapter has a different character at the center or a different action at the center. And for us, my design team, I have to give them a shout out. I worked with Kate McGee on lights and Lee Kinney on sound, and my music collaborators, Zdenka Martin and I wrote music for it, and the incredible Andy Jean on costumes and Daniel Soul on design. And so we kind of all got together and we're like, let's really embrace the structure of this play. I'm gonna share my screen with you one more time, because structure kind of gives you a spine, a backbone. And so you can see the authors very neatly kind of gathered it, each one into a part, right? It not only has a part, but it has a title. So it's like when I see something like that, I'm like, I've got to do something with that. I have to acknowledge this structure that the writers are trying to take me through. I want to show you part 2. For example, here also has a title, Achilles. So we know we're going to be focusing on Achilles. And all this structure does is just give me different ways to kind of bring it to life. So for example, for our production, the way we acknowledged those parts or chapters or book titles was through music very often. We would punctuate a book with movement and music and lighting and then move into something else. So it's really good to get to know the play, because your brain is going to see many different structures. Some people might not want to observe that kind of episodic chapter structure, I did. You might be more interested in making your own structure. It's like, when does a character become in the foreground? Maybe you're using one character to kind of dictate your structure. But whatever it is, you know, structure yields analysis, and analysis allows you to be able to put something in space normally. Can I show some more images from the Long Wharf production? You can pull up the one of Rachel. Yeah, this one of her in the helmet. The second one. Boom. Okay. So you might notice when you look at this image, and then can you take us to one of the New York Theater Workshop images, please? Any one of them, with Dennis. Yeah, that one. And you look at that image, those look like very different productions, right? You can take me back to Rachel. But really, the essence of an Iliad is the relationship between the poet and the audience, right? The whole thing is done in direct address in this kind of stunning way. Can I see the one with Rachel in red? Down, 2 images down. 1, and then 1 more down. Boom. So you can kind of see, you know, we played around with the idea of a cave, if you look at that kind of mass over there, but also the idea of a concert, because one thing that's repeated throughout the play over and over again is like, oh muse, oh music, and the poet is often talking about his love of art and understanding of society. And so for us, that kind of translated very directly into like a concert setting. Will you show the one right after that for me? Boom. Right, that gives you a really great sense of the landscape we kind of created. So it's like this woman comes out with a suitcase, very similar to what happened in the original production, and starts talking to the audience, but slowly the kind of curtain is pulled away, and you can see this very kind of dense landscape that's a mixture of a concert space and also a kind of organic space you find in Troy. And in finding that, I had some great conversations with my set designer, in which we talked about Massive Attack and 9 Inch Nails and a lot of bands we liked that we thought spoke to the kind of grittiness of the piece, the violence in the piece, given that it's discussing war throughout time. And also, it made a landscape where music, it wouldn't be weird to have music, right? If you feel like you're in a concert, it's not weird to have music. And so this actor you see here his name is Zdenko Martin, and he worked on the music with me. That's a great one. This is Z, and he worked on the music with me, and we kind of made this this response to an Iliad in which music could really be more foregrounded, which was really exciting. Can I see that picture of the bassist from the New York Theater Workshop production again? Bloop. Yep. And so similarly to the New York Theater Workshop production, music was at the core of the piece. But the way I interpret it, it kind of gave Lee Kinney, my sound designer, and myself room to make it sound more digital and more electronic, because we felt very rooted in 2019. So this long monologue I'm giving you guys is all to say is like, there's 2 steps, you know, you have to get to know the text like it's a Bible so that you can then make your own rules. And then you have to get in there and have a point of view about who the piece is for, where it's taking place, when it's taking place, and how you want to do it. And for us, we felt very much that it should feel like 2019. It should sound like 2019. The music should use all of the kind of tools that we use in the now, which means it could be electronic, it could be acoustic, it could have, you know, be run through pedals and computers. It could have a very, very now feeling. And that once we decided that we wanted it to take place in the now and that it was going to be centered around a Black female poet, the whole piece kind of started to come from there. Can I show, I think maybe it's a good time to play some music. Could we play the clip I sent from the New York Theater Workshop production? 2 seconds, fam. I want to, hold on, 2 seconds. That was from our Long Wharf production. So while they're searching for it, I'll tell you a little bit more about what you're going to hear. You're going to hear 2 clips of the kind of same moment. You'll hear one from New York Theater Workshop in which Dennis is being fierce, and you'll also hear one from ours, and you'll hear the difference between the kind of acoustic take on the music and then the electronic take on the music that we took. Let me know if you guys can't pull that one up.
I'm going to play this, Whitney.
Okay. Great. So right there, you heard just like a little snippet, and that was the way we kind of played with the guitar in ours. Do you guys have the other one that I sent?
Is it the Patroclus?
Yeah. It says, hold on one second. While they look for that, we'll move on and maybe we'll come back to it. But interestingly enough is like, you know, they interpreted the music that kind of fueled the poet through the upright bass, and we did the same thing just with guitar. Can I exit screen for a second? Yay. So we'll play you some of those things soon. We'll just get ourselves organized. We'll talk about something else. I think in terms of interpreting the text, you cannot do it alone. And the best thing you can do for yourself is get talking to designers right away. So after I've done my 3rd read, you know, then I'm ready to talk to some designers. And the first people I talked to for this was the sound designer, Lee Kinney, and Zdenko Martin, who I wanted to work on with music, because essentially the play is just like a long monologue, you know, that can be wearing on the audience and on the performer. So you need a way to break that up. You need a way to kind of like invite everyone in, and so music is the way. And they did the same thing at New York Theater Workshop, and we did that at Long Wharf. But it was like, I remember I met with Lee and I was like, well, what can we do if the primary instrument is the guitar and not an upright bass? If we don't use the original music, you know, what can our soundscape be? And the amazing thing about the guitar is it's just like the possibilities are endless. And it's also very similarly to kind of ancient Greek mythology. It's something very familiar to the American audience, right? Like, we love a good guitar moment in the US. And so I thought it would be a really good way in for some people who might not be familiar with this story or comfortable with hearing ancient Greek spoken at them. You know, the guitar is a very locating, centering thing. And so we started talking about all the possibilities that could happen if that music had to be executed live on stage. You know, like, what are the sounds we could use and what's the technology that's theater friendly? Because that's the other thing, is like, there's many ways that the world of music can feel ahead of theater. It uses a lot of gear and a lot of technology, and it's really, really complicated sometimes. But I was like, well, how can it feel 2019 and tech friendly and like super modern, but be executed in the theater? And so we kind of landed on a lot of looping, guitar looping, guitar pedals, and basically working with a laptop so that the performer could feel like he could manipulate the sound. And I thought that was quite successful. I think they have these audio samples now. Yeah? Can we play it? Can we play the New York Theater Workshop one first?
Yep, 1 second.
Hey, great.
That's what Achilles' shield looked like from a distance. It just bounced the light back, shot it way out like that. dashed toward the city, heart racing, rushing on like a champion stallion, drawing the chariot full tilt, sweeping across the plain in easy tearing strides. So Achilles hurtled on, driving legs and knees, and Hector was first to see him coming, surging across the plain, blazing like a star.
Great. Awesome.
Eh?
I love that clip. I love that clip because it's from a very kind of like what I call climactic moment in the piece. And you can kind of hear how it's a very like sensitive, reflective kind of oral landscape that bass and the sound designers on that production made. It foregrounds Dennis's voice in this beautiful way. It gets the imagination going, but it doesn't kind of it doesn't cut the knees off of the text. The text is in the foreground. And I thought that was really beautifully executed. In our production, however, because I am, you know, a product of the now, I thought that the moment maybe should cut the text out at the knees a little bit, because basically what you're listening to is a huge chase sequence. And it's when the poet is describing a final fight between Hector and Achilles that brought so much shame and pain and trauma to both communities. So we went with a more aggressive moment, and we'll play that for you now. Go ahead. We play the second one from the Long Wharf production. Yeah, that's great. You can play that one.
Was that the right one, or was it the other one? I'm sorry, Whitney.
Right. No, that's one. Play that one. Thank you.
Great.
We love you. Thank you. Great. Thank you. That's awesome. So could you show them, I want to show you guys some images from this moment too. You can pull up those images one last time and then I'll leave you alone. Thank you, New York Theater Workshop. Awesome. You could start with the one with Z in the red. Boop. Great. So this moment that you just heard from both productions is this huge fight scene, right? And we kind of took a caesura or a pause with the text to play this music so we could do a more intense physical moment. I kind of stuck to the rules for most of the piece, you know, in terms of having the poet at the foreground, telling this epic poem to the audience. And then I broke that because I wanted to see some people fight, y'all. And I wanted to take a leap with the design and the production so that I could have a really visceral moment. So I'm going to show you some images from that. You could click to the next one. Just scroll down. Boom. So our awesome lighting designer, Kate McGee, kind of found this vocabulary of a light box. And Zdenko, who also did our music, happens to be a Taekwondo teacher. So we got to do some very wild movement sequences that he and I built together, as you can see. And that music that you just heard from our production kind of was an extended moment. And the more intense the fighting got, the more color came into the world. We can skip ahead. And so each time they moved, it was kind of a different color gesture. Go ahead. Which was really, really, really fun. And then at the end of the fight, of course, the accomplice or the muse, who Zdenko played, is taken back to his music station and the poet resumes telling the primary story. But this was a really, really fun kind of, I think, point of divergence in both productions. Like they were very unique in each production, but I think spoke to the text equally well. And the way that our team interpreted this was just a product of all those things I hope I said cohesively earlier, but multiple reads, multiple kind of filters on those reads, and then getting into dialogue with designers who will have their own point of view. I also want to point out the costuming here that Andy Jean did, because again, our influences were not only the original production, but the ancient Greek tradition of wrestling and fighting and the body, and also 2019. So poor Andy Jean, my brilliant costume designer, they were like, well, what do you want them to look like? I'm like, I don't know, like they could have crawled through ancient Greece and also come through an airport with their band gear, and also they're like wrestling ninjas. And Andy was like, okay, thanks. And we kind of found this kind of, again, center point from all those places. All right, that's it on that. You can take me back. Cool. So yeah, I mean, that's it. That's like my 45 minutes. I think, what I have to say overall about interpreting text is to just go as far as you can. And if you're working with living playwrights, they'll reel you back in, of course. But it's like, in doing a second production of something, sometimes doing the second production is just the most thrilling thing, right? Because everybody knows what the first one did, and you now get to do your own thing with it and stay in dialogue with it. And I was really blessed to have a creative team that went with me every step of the way. When I was like, it's a concert, but it's ancient Greece, and it's also now, and I think when you hit a wall in the design process, very often it's good to go back to those notes from your first read, when you're first like dreaming about what it could be. I'm going to share one last moment from the piece that we kind of interpreted. And we'll share some audio from that too. It's a very fun one. So in the piece, like we mentioned before, the text is doing three things. It's doing ancient Greek, it's doing a translation of the Iliad, and also it's doing contemporary language. And Lisa and Dennis have this very hilarious text. I'm just going to read it to you. And it comes from the book that's kind of focused on Patroclus. I highly recommend just reading this text, you guys, because it's really a masterpiece in terms of contemporary adaptation, right? So anyways, it says, suddenly shifting his tone. You know that feeling when, for whatever reason, you could kill somebody right then and there. You could kill them. You could tear their fucking head off. You could rend them limb from limb. The guy in front of you cuts you off. You could ram him with your car. You don't care about the result, just ram him. And you could see the charred metal, and you could see the smoking thing, and you could see the airbag, and you hope the airbag smothers him. And if it doesn't, you'll get out and you'll go, you fucking idiot. Why did you cut me off? And then it goes into this translation, which is glint of spear, tore his opponent's chest, stabbed his right jawbone, ramming the spearhead square between his teeth so hard, hoisted, dragged the Trojan, fury bursting his heart. So this section is kind of when the poet goes a little bananas. And I think in this very smart way, Lisa and Dennis give you a contemporary example of going bananas, having this fantasy of murdering the person in the car ahead of you, which we do not condone, but it happens. And then it goes into the translation. So could I play that other audio sample now that I sent you guys? It's the third one, the very last one. And you can see how we interpreted it with sound. Thank you, New York Workshop.
Glint of spear tore his opponent's chest, stabbing his right jawbone, ramming the spearhead square between his teeth so hard. Hoisted, dragging the Trojan, fury bursting his heart, mouth gaping, flipped him down face first, dead as he fell. Lunging in, he flung a rock, struck between his eyes, crushed both brows, the skull caved in, and both eyes burst from their sockets. Nothing can hurt Patroclus now. He is a killing machine. My God. Patroclus, like...
Awesome. So that was how we interpreted that little monologue.
And his men, hungry as wolves that rend...
Great. Thank you. That was how we interpreted that little monologue I just read you, you know? So I think that's just a testament of, you know, letting your imagination fly, getting to know the play, and then talking to designers that will go there with you. All right, I'm talking a lot. I'm done talking. I'd love to answer questions.
I love it. Thank you, Whitney. That's incredible. And so, yeah, so insightful, so articulate, so thought through. I so appreciate it. Many people appreciate it. So far, we have 15 people who have written in. Whitney is fabulous, how useful for general text analysis, as well as for directors. Thank you. This is so great. Thank you for going through your process with such clarity and precision. Deeply appreciated. Lisa Peterson says, Whitney, I love you so. And the way you talk about how a director...
Oh my God.
And the way you talk about how directors find their interpretive tempo and mode so well articulated. And there's over 230 people watching between the two platforms. So thank you for bringing together this community. In terms of questions, first question, how does your process differ when you're working on a world premiere? Diane would love to hear how you talk about your process of collaborating with playwrights.
Yeah, well, it's such a good question because it is a very different process. I think that, like, I always like to say a world premiere can feel like what I call a quiet directing process, because you're working usually, sometimes not, but most of the time with a living playwright who has very strong will and intention. And just to keep it real and keep it humble, which I always like to do, that writer has been living with that play for maybe years, and you're just coming in maybe into a 6-month process, right? Mm-hmm. So I always like to say that with a world premiere, I try and have a quieter director practice, which means ask first, you know, get the information from the living source first, and then interpret, you know, whereas with a classic or even a second production, I'll interpret first and then ask. And so I call a remount or a classic a loud directing process, because I expect to speak very loudly right away out the gate. Whereas with a world premiere, it's like being a student and you have to learn. Like I have a collaborator, her name's Alicia Harris. She is like everything in a bag of chips. I can't say how much I love her, but it's like in order to direct her plays, I had to go to the school of Alicia Harris. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think it's about your voice and how you create space for the living playwright's voice before yours at all times. And that doesn't shift for me personally until I'm in tech. Because then when I'm in tech, I'm like, okay, now I need to just kind of take this into my own hands. I don't know, that sounds so scary, but you know what I mean. It's like a little more, you're leading a little bit stronger. Whereas with a classic, you can lead that way from the beginning.
Thank you. In terms of thinking about collaborators, how do you find the designers you like to work with?
Oh my God, you guys, designers are everything. I think the smartest thing Ivo van Hove ever did was marry his set designer. That was brilliant. Get them. You must find them and then you get them and then they're yours. I'm kidding, sort of. But I think that, you know, the New York theater, the American theater landscape is a beautiful one with many different people from all kinds of learning backgrounds. And I think I say that only because it's really important to work with designers from different backgrounds. There is a graduate design program that often catapults designers up faster, but now more these days, I'm looking more for people who just connect to the text in an exciting way. So that sounds very smoke and mirrors, but literal ways I find designers is I look up designers from productions I love. Most of the time, you'll be so surprised, like you write them and they just write you back. They're just like, yeah, I'd love to talk. And then I also I have a mission and passion for like young artists. So I'll review portfolios from undergrad and graduate programs. And then also being an artist and woman of color, I know how often the education system can be marginalizing. And there's a lot of designers in our business that have years and decades of experience, but they're not in that MFA cycle. So sometimes I'll go look at regional dance programs or educational programs. And a lot of times the faculty members at these art schools have these incredible years of experience, but just didn't get access to the New York market. So there's so many ways to do it, but usually it's like, do the research, find someone and just write them. They're usually designers. They're much nicer and cooler and more fun than playwrights and directors, I think, because they just want to talk about the work, you know? They don't have skin in the game in the same way sometimes that a writer or director does, I think. That's not a universal thought. That's just my point of view. So they can be quite porous and open in this really beautiful way and accessible. So look at the graduate programs at Yale, CalArts, and NYU, and then look at the undergrad programs, and then, you know, go online to your favorite New York Theater Workshop production, Slave Play, or any of them, and just look up those names of those designers. They always have websites, and literally 9 times out of 10, if you write them with an inquiry, they'll get back with something thoughtful, and then that's the beginning of your dialogue.
And how do you think about movement in text? There's a couple of different questions specifically about our Dear Dead Drug Lord.
Oh my God.
But more broadly, I mean, What to Send Up has tremendous movement in it. The Amen Corner. How do you build those moments from text?
I think the interesting thing is like, I don't often bill myself as a choreographer, even though I did do the choreography for all those productions Aaron just mentioned, because there are people like Raja Feather Kelly who will just like explode your mind. But every now and then I do have an impulse about movement, and I call it like an impulse. And so example for an Iliad, like I knew I wanted a fight. Like I wanted a real knock 'em down fight. My set designer built me this like mountain. I was like, I want to see this Black woman like roll down this mountain. Like I wanted to see movement, and I usually want to see movement that puts real sweat on someone's brow. Like when I can see an actor feel it, then I start to feel it. So for our Dear Dead Drug Lord, I'd like to say that dance sequence came from like a rave in 2010. Oh my God, I hope my mom's not watching this. I never went to any raves, Mom, I'm kidding. But that movement was very rooted in what I call the teenage female body, which is this kind of combust engine of like heat and change and hormones, and I wanted it to feel very angular and frenetic. Whereas the Amen Corner was rooted in the Black church, which is a wonderful world of movement, what I call spiritual-based movement, stemming from West African dance traditions, and it's just like there's so much there. So I should clarify, like our Dear Dead Drug Lord came from like my own personal interests in movement, my body moving weirdly, the girls' bodies moving, whereas the Amen Corner was what I call research-based choreography. You know, it's a play set in the 50s, set in a Black church, so I'm not reinventing the wheel. So that came from watching and doing research and looking at what's out there in a kind of dramaturgical way, and then putting something together like that. And then for an Iliad, you know, I don't do Taekwondo, but my music collaborator does. So me and the other woman who starred in the show were like, we don't know Taekwondo, but he would show us some movement and I would listen to the music and we would find a way in through that. So that's what I would call like more choreographed or consultant-based movement. It just varies by production. I think when you're doing that first read though, that's where this comes from for me. It's like you read it once and you can kind of, you know, get up and move around after you read it and articulate how you want it to move. And then that's your movement vocabulary, you know, it all come from the text.
Cool.
I hope that was.
No, that's great. That is really insightful. A couple of questions about how you take your work interpreting text into the rehearsal room with actors.
Oh my gosh, that's the most fun. Actors are so talented and they have their own ideas. I think I always like to think of it as a pitch session. Like I have a list of inquiries, questions, and assumptions. Everything, there's no such thing as truth. Everybody has their own perspective. So like I went into the Iliad with questions about a rock concert aesthetic. I always have questions about that. And also I had questions about wrestling and movement and intimacy. And so I find that when you get, it's like 80% of your job, I think Sam Gold told me this, is casting. Like once you get the right collaborators in the room, you should be able to pitch things to them, and you can look at people and see when their brains light up, when they're into something, and when they're like, you know, and when they're not. And as the more I'm talking to my actors about what I want the world to be, the things that make them go, ooh, like the things that turn the light bulb on are the things that end up in the play. So I try and go into the room empowering actors to be collaborators, because it's like they're the filter, they're the cheese grate, I don't know, what do you say? It's like I throw the things at them, and then some things stick and some don't. Some don't.
Two somewhat interrelated questions. One is, can you talk about turning the first few reads of a script into a pitch for a theater? And then there's a second, to me that seems related, question about when you're looking at projects to work on, where are you finding things, or are you finding that you're approached by theaters to direct things, or what's the balance of that? Maybe I shouldn't have combined those.
No, that's good. Those are good. Just remind me of the second one when I finish the first one. The first one is about, tell me the first one more time.
How do you turn your first two reads, the dream and the Bible, into a pitch? Yeah.
Well, ultimately I am one of those linguistic believers that language fails. You know, like I'm speaking to you all, and while you're probably trying to listen to me, like your brain is actually lighting up on specific phrases that have kind of points of congruence to your life and your own experience. So it can be hard to talk to anyone about anything and find like understanding, which is why we're probably in this horrible situation right now. But I find that when I'm pitching, because of that, I don't want my language, like I believe in communication and verbal communication, but I don't want that to be the only way that an artistic director or producer experiences my idea. So I tend to be very into lots of images, like too many images, you know what I mean? And files and media. It's funny because in the world of TV and film, they do these things called pitch decks, where they write out this really cute thing in PowerPoint or a fancier medium, whatever you want to use, and it has images and language and slides. I could probably show you guys one that I've done, but I actually have been doing that for theater for quite some time now. Like I put all my stuff together that way, just so that the image is clear, you know, because it's so hard to find any kind of understanding even among people with similar views. So you don't want to leave it to just you verbally pitching it. You want to find other mediums that are also speaking to what you want to do and put it all together and then send it with generosity, love, and respect for someone to look at if they have time.
And then the second half is about, do you actively read new shows to find possibilities, or are you more approached by folks?
Well, I still feel I'm an emerging director, and to get to the place where it's like someone's like, Whitney White, tell me what you want to do, that's like still very I don't know if I'm quite there yet. So often it's threefold. Often I'm making my own work, or a script is sent to me via someone I respect, or I'll stalk someone down for their script. That happens, I feel, a lot with students, because I really, again, love working with students. And sometimes I'll be like, no, send me your script for real, I want to do it. And then often there's theaters that already have season programming, because I don't want to make light of how difficult and special it is for theaters to put together their seasons, because they're thinking about their audiences and subscription base and the themes that speak to their particular mission, and also where they are politically in the world and what they want to say, and they're selecting that work. And every now and then I'm privileged enough to be approached to direct that work. And when I am approached, I do the same thing I would do as if I read someone's script I found myself. I'll read it and see if I connect to it. And if I can connect to it and make a pitch for it, then I can direct it. But sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can't connect to everything that comes your way, and it's totally okay to let someone else do it who can connect to it.
This is a question that I think specifically comes from the Iliad, but I think really could speak more broadly to your work. How do you stage war without glorifying trauma?
Ugh.
And I
props. That was a good question. I mean, I cut you off, Erin, though. Was that the end of the question?
Yeah, no, that was the whole question. I just think that there's specific, I feel like that comes up again and again in your work.
It does. I mean, I think that's also why I chose a Black woman to be at the center of a lot of my projects, not all of them, but some of them, because that is a line you have to be respectful of. I think the piece I worked on of Alicia's What to Send Out When It Goes Down, we were asking that every day because we wanted to release and celebrate. We're not trying to pick at a scab. We're not trying to like deepen the wound. We're looking ways to look at the wound so that it can heal. And so I think as an artist of color, I'm always thinking of that because I do believe that the American theater sometimes celebrate what I would say, I hope I can say this, but pain porn, like seeing someone rip their lungs, like rip their chest open on stage for no kind of end goal is kind of like, I think traumatizing and abusive for the performer and the audience, but we're kind of addicted to that. So it's like, how do you look at violence without playing into that? And I think the way that we did it for an Iliad, I had a lot of check-ins with the actress. I mean, Rachel Christopher is like this supernova of an actress, and I could look at her straight up and be like, how does that feel for you? And she'd be like, that doesn't feel so great. And when my performer says that doesn't feel so great, it means we're either doing something unhealthy or we haven't deepened it, or there's likely a better way to do it. So I think in terms of like checking in with trauma, the best way to do it, because you are ultimately the director, no matter how smart we think we are, ultimately we are not up on stage doing that every night. I think the best thing to do is to work with actors you respect and trust so that you can ask them, are you okay with this? Does this feel triggering in the right way or the wrong way? And then for me as a director, literally, that's why the movement became like Taekwondo meets dance, right? Like I don't need to see someone, it wasn't literal. Whereas in Our Dear Dead Drug Lord, if you saw that, the final 10 minutes of that had a very literal act of violence that the playwright and I landed on because we had been studying lots of different kind of blood rituals, right? I think it just depends on the piece and the actors. But usually there's always a more elegant way to do something. I mean, that's why the world of dance and choreography is amazing. That's why dance has been an art form as, from the beginning of time, because you can look at something stylistically without doing something garish or traumatic. You could do it artfully.
Cool. How do you think your MFA has impacted you as an artist in your career? And do you have advice for folks who have not studied theater and want to direct?
Oh, snap, y'all. I think I have to say my undergraduate degree technically is in political science with a certificate in musical theater and French. So I have to be so straight up about that. I didn't I didn't wake up and was like, I'm going to be a director and studied it for 10 years. I had to go like this to find my way as a maker. I acted for like years and years and years, and that wasn't quite it. And my MFA is like technically in acting, and while I was in that MFA program, I got the opportunity to direct my first play, and then it all the little pieces came together. So I think for me, I needed to go to that program because I didn't understand what direction I was on. I knew I wanted more, but I had no idea what I wanted to do with myself. I wanted to stop acting and take control over my narratives, but I had no idea how. But I also meet a lot of artists who are incredible self-starters. And like I said, I'm often looking for designers outside the MFA program and writers outside the MFA program because, as we all know, that's a funneling program. So there's so many people who are never welcome to sit at that table. And their work is just as thrilling as someone who has been able to sit at the table. So I think you have to look at yourself and ask 3 questions. Like, am I a self-starter, and can I get what I need on my own terms and in my own way? You know, the arts haven't changed that much since like Michelangelo's time. It's still a system of patronage, mentorship, and institutional support. If you feel you can find a mentor, you can find people that support and love your work, and you can get your foot in institutions, you might not want the MFA, you know? Also, on the other hand, so the first question is like, what did I say my first question was, Erin? Oh my God.
It was about how do you feel like your MFA has influenced your work?
Yes.
and
Are you
your
a
course?
self-starter? Are you like a self-starter who can find what you need? The next question is, do you feel aesthetically rooted in a tradition? Like, do you feel like you found your aesthetics? I hadn't at the time. I needed to go and have people drag me forcefully with love. I love you, Brown Trinity, no tea, no shade. I'd have people drag me through learning about all these different types of art and theater so that I could kind of find where my compass was pointing to. But if you feel like you can do that on your own, you might not need it. And then the other thing is like colleagues, cohort, and just homies. Like, do you feel you have access to the homies that you want to be making work with right now? And if not, do you have your own way of finding those people? And if not, you might want to look at an MFA, because again, you're forced to be in a playground with others again, which can be very good. But it's, you know, I also took 4 or 5 years in between undergrad and grad. I believe in people finding education at all ages. And I think if you're unsure, then it's like, take the time to see. But it's really about self-starting, finding your aesthetics, finding institution and community. That's it. Those are the 3 things that like have made my career. And if you can do it in your own way, you can try it. And who says you don't try it for a while and then apply to the MFA, you know?
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This is a question from somebody who is writing a play, and there's time travel in the play, and she's having a hard time writing it. So I think the question is about how much should be written in and how much should be left for the director and the designers to interpret it. And I feel like there is a similar, we'll see, maybe this doesn't thread, but there's another question about your approach to reading a text, like what to send up that doesn't have a traditional format. So I wonder how you navigate creating the event from a text, and how much you feel like you need and how much you want, how much space do you want as a director?
Such a good question. I mean, I think if you saw earlier, when I showed that author's note, that's a long author's note that Lisa and Dennis wrote, you know? And if you read Tennessee Williams, like Homeboy was like, the light should be like that. And it's like this kind of pillow with this kind of fabric, you know what I mean? And then you'll read like a super sparse German text that will like rock your world, and it's just language. I think also, yes to time travel. I think we should be doing more sci-fi in the American theater. So I already am on your team with that. But I think if you're doing something innovative, I would call time travel on stage pretty innovative. It's totally great and healthy to over-explain. You know what I mean? What's it gonna do? Like, who's it gonna hurt? That's my question when I'm working with emerging writers, and they're like, should I write this? And I'm like, well, do you want that? Do you want me to consider it? Doesn't mean I'm gonna do it anyway, by the way. You know what I mean? So it's like, you know, I've had the privilege of seeing someone like Lynn Nottage at work, and she's like so brilliant with her stage directions. And I remember one time Lucas Nath told me, it's like, don't leave it to chance, you know, share your idea. And I think that that's healthy, you know what I mean? It's good to just get that out. Because also, just write too much in your first draft, and then once you hear it out loud, you'll know. But if you never take the time to try and articulate it, you'll probably be stuck in a rehearsal in 2 years and be like, God, should have done that. You know what I mean? So I think try and over-explain, especially if you're looking at themes of like science and you're innovating for the American theater. Like, people don't understand, you know? I barely understand, and I'll read it like 5 times. So I think you should go for it. And then you can always, deleting is always easier than coming up with something new. And then what was the other one?
it was about how you read. I mean, I think it was related, but just about how does your reading of a text shift when it's something like What to Send Up?
Oh my gosh.
When it doesn't have a traditional or as traditional a form to it.
Well, the thing is, you know, a lot of people are like, it's not so traditional, but Alicia wrote a play. Like, it's full on a play. And to the first question, she has descriptors in there. I want this moment to be this. And then we move here. And then movement takes us here. And so while the actual structure of the play is non-traditional, insofar as how she wrote it on a page, it's very traditional because she's very explicit about what she was interested in and what each moment should be and how technically they should be executed. So when I read What to Send Up, the best way I could explain it is it just read like a piece of music. It was hyper specific and hyper innovative, and it read like a score. Like, it had rhythms and tempos and keys and sections and like alle retours. It really reads like a Mozart score or something. It's just got so many, and what I mean by that, it has so many layers of information. So if anything, to the first question, I hope that that's inspiring to you. She doesn't leave it to chance. And the more you articulate your idea, someone like me can only go crazier with that in a fun way. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's harder to interpret a text that has too little information almost, for me. Because all information is helpful most of the time.
Love it. Let's do one last question.
These are the best questions, y'all.
They're amazing questions. And there also has been a lot more love coming in for you and appreciation for your generosity and your genius. The last question I think I'll ask is, how do you develop and expand your practice between productions and rehearsal processes? And I suppose tangentially, what are you doing now to expand your practice in this moment? How are you nourishing yourself as an artist?
That's a really good, those are great. I think in terms of developing and expanding, every time you work on a piece of theater by someone, whether they're living or deceased, you're in dialogue with that person. And because that person has lived a different life from you, I think that you can be enriched by it. So I think, you know, the way that I expand my process is kind of trying to just get into the writer, because it'll usually take me somewhere new. So for the Amen Corner by James Baldwin's beautiful piece of text, I highly recommend. If any theater or artist who wants to work on Glass Menagerie should just work on this play. Like, it's one of our great American classics that is not getting its due. Hopefully that will change when we all find our way out of this. But like, you know, Brother Baldwin, as I call him, led this life as a thinker, an activist, educator, writer, and dramatist. And while I was working on the play, I just tried to immerse myself in his world, and that furthered my practice. That gave me more inspiration to be a multi-hyphenate, to work on different things, to work as an activist. You know what I mean? Whereas working with John Caron, this awesome writer, I directed a play of his in California, you know, he's done all this amazing work in the film world, and he's this really smart kind of innovative artist, and like, he gave me all this inspiration in a different way. So I think the easiest way to expand your process your artistic process is to get lots of sources all the time from the work you're doing. You know, what does the playwright like? Where did the playwright go to school? What are they talking about? You know, what are their preferences? That's the stuff that usually helps me open up outside of my world. And then you ask what I'm doing now. I mean, I'm really feeling the kind of deprivation, like I'm missing being in the room with other people breathing the same air as me, and being in proximity to other humans. But I think it is a time where I feel like I'm taking in a lot. There are so many plays to read. Like I said, it's like, I wonder how many people on here have read The Amen Corner, you know, but I'm sure most of you have read or seen Glass Menagerie. So I feel really inspired right now to be like learning a lot more, and also learning about, for better or worse, the digital medium. While it's really, really painful to see so many great institutions like New York Theater Workshop kind of be in a pause, at the same time, there's something about the American theater that I think, unfortunately remain very marginalizing for large swaths of the population. It's still an art form in many ways for the upper class. There's so many people I know and love who are not coming uptown to that fancy show, but they will log onto their laptop, computer, TV, or phone and like watch something. So there's something about the digital medium that is kind of an equalizer and reaches a lot of populations that mean something to me. So that it's like, how do we tell stories on that level? And how can we not leave out all the designers and all the people that make theater possible? Because that's the other challenging thing about media is like, it's very easy to just like lose all those collaborators and just get like a video editor or something. It's like, no, the joy of theater is being in dialogue with the text and all these people. So how can we do that digitally? But yeah, I'm listening to a lot of music, reading a lot of books, reading a lot of plays, y'all, and cooking a lot of food. Food is now part of my practice, I guess.
I love it. I love it. Well, Whitney, this has been really wonderful. Thank you so much for spending the afternoon with us, and with those of us watching here on Facebook, on Zoom. I just want to plug a couple of things before we depart. On Wednesday, we are having a studio tour with director, designer, performer Thaddeus Phillips, who has done 17 Border Crossings, El Conquistador, and Red Eye to Havre de Grace with New York Theater Workshop. And next Monday, we are having a masterclass with Elizabeth Marvel, a performer who's going to be performing classic text. As I said at the beginning, there's a full list of our programming that is available on our website, nytw.org. As I said at the beginning, this class, all of our programming is free and available to our entire community near and wide. All the artists who are participating in our programming are compensated, and we are able to be keeping our full staff on board at this point as well. Any gift you have, $25, $10, $5, if you're in a position to support our work, we would so appreciate it, and it will help see us through this crisis and beyond. And there's a short survey that you'll have the link to in Zoom, and it'll be in the comments on Facebook. If you could take a minute to tell us what you thought, we would love to hear from you. Thank you again, Whitney. Thank you all for being here.
Yeah.
Please stay healthy, stay safe, and we will hope to see you back at the theater soon.
Bye, take care.
Bye.